They called themselves the Iron Wolves, the most notorious outlaws in the Appalachian Mountains. For months, they'd been terrorizing the small town of Whisper Valley, treating its people like their personal playthings, until they encountered Thomas McKenna. To them, he was just another blind fiddler at the local tavern, an easy target for their cruel amusement. But when they shattered his grandfather's Civil War violin, they made the biggest mistake of their lives. What these ruthless outlaws didn't know was that this quiet musician was once the most decorated marksman in Special Forces history, and his blindness had only made his other senses deadlier. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn wind whistled through Whisper Valley's narrow streets as Thomas McKenna's fingers moved with practiced precision across the strings of his violin. For 15 years, he'd performed this same ritual at the Crossroads Tavern, his music bringing warmth to the cold mountain nights. His movements were measured now, different from his younger days, but no less purposeful than when he'd been the eyes of his Special Forces unit in the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan. Sarah Connor watched from behind the tavern's weathered bar, wiping glasses that were already clean. She'd been serving drinks in Whisper Valley for 2 decades, and like everyone else in town, she'd grown accustomed to the haunting beauty of Thomas's evening melodies. "Your coffee's getting cold, Thomas," she called out between songs. Thomas turned, a slight smile crossing his scarred face. "Can't rush the music, Sarah. Some things need their proper time." Inside the tavern, Michael Bishop sat at his usual corner table, his own coffee growing cold, as he watched a group of leather-clad men swagger past the front windows. Their motorcycles rumbled like distant thunder, the patches on their jackets bearing the emblem of the Iron Wolves. A snarling beast with steel in its teeth. "4th time this week," Michael observed as Thomas finished his song. "They're getting bolder." Thomas settled onto his regular stool at the bar, his movements carrying the same precision he showed with his bow. Folks who need to show their strength usually don't have much of it. Sarah placed a fresh cup of coffee before him, her hands trembling slightly. "They were in here yesterday afternoon, Thomas. 8 of them. Scared my customers half to death, throwing their weight around like they owned the place." Thomas's unseeing eyes narrowed slightly, the only indication that her words had struck a nerve. "They give you any real trouble?" "Not exactly," Sarah hesitated, glancing toward the door. "But their leader, the one they call Marcus, he made it clear they'd be expecting special treatment from now on. Free drinks, whatever they want. Said it was for protection." The tavern's door creaked open as Sheriff James Carter entered, his badge catching the dim lamplight. The lawman's face carried the weight of too many similar conversations. "Evening, Thomas, Sarah, Michael," he nodded, to each in turn, settling onto a stool next to the blind fiddler. "Suppose you've heard about the Wilson place." Thomas wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. "David mentioned something yesterday. Vandalism's putting it mildly." James sighed, accepting a coffee from Sarah. "Broke every instrument in his music shop, left one of their wolf teeth behind. Their calling card. David's thinking of selling, moving to his daughter's place in Charleston. 3rd business this month." "First it was the bakery," Michael added from his corner. "Then the general store, now this." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "They're smart. Never enough evidence to make charges stick, and folks are too scared to testify anyway." Thomas studied the darkness he'd lived in for the past decade, his unseeing eyes focused on something far beyond the tavern walls. "Fear's a funny thing, James. Makes people forget who they are, what they're capable of." "Speaking from experience?" the sheriff asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Thomas's scarred face took on a distant expression, seeing memories no darkness could dim. "Back in 2010, Had a young lieutenant in my unit, green as spring grass, scared of his own shadow. Taliban had us pinned down in the Hindu Kush, worst firefight I'd seen. That lieutenant, he found something inside himself that day, something stronger than fear. Well, what happened to him? Sarah asked softly. A slight smile crossed Thomas's face. Last I heard, he was commanding a special forces training facility. Fear didn't define him. His response to it did. The rumble of motorcycles grew louder. Again, through the windows, they watched as 5 riders from the Iron Wolves parked their bikes directly in front of the tavern. One of them, a tall man they called Razor, deliberately knocked over Thomas's violin case from its place near the door. "Better clean that up, old man," Razor called out, his voice carrying through the windows. "Wouldn't want anyone to trip and hurt themselves." Thomas continued sipping his coffee, seemingly unperturbed by the display of intimidation, but Michael noticed how his knuckles had whitened around the cup. "They're pushing," James said quietly. "Testing boundaries, seeing who'll break first." "That how you see it, Sheriff?" Thomas's voice remained steady. James met his unseeing gaze. "How do you see it, Thomas?" "I see men who mistake cruelty for strength," Thomas replied, "who think fear equals respect." He stood slowly, leaving money for his coffee. "Learned a long time ago, men like that don't stop pushing until they hit something solid." As Thomas walked toward the door, Sarah called after him. "Thomas, what are you going to do?" He paused, his hand on the carved wooden cane he rarely needed, but always carried. "Same thing I do every evening, Sarah. Play my music. Remember who I am." He looked back at them, and for just a moment, they saw something in his scarred face. Not anger, but the kind of quiet resolve that moved mountains. "Question is, when the time comes, will this town remember who it is?" The door closed behind him with a gentle creak. They watched through the window as Thomas moved past the sneering bikers without acknowledgement, his steps precise despite his blindness. He began gathering his violin case, his movements unhurried but purposeful. "Sometimes I forget," Michael said softly, "what he used to be before he was just Thomas the blind fiddler." Sheriff Carter's face was grim. "Way things are going, we might all be reminded soon enough." Outside, the autumn wind carried the sound of approaching thunder, or perhaps it was more motorcycles. Thomas's violin case cast a long shadow across the street like a line drawn in the dirt, a boundary that once crossed would change everything. Marcus Stone sat astride his custom Harley-Davidson, watching the Crossroads Tavern through mirrored sunglasses. The evening mist curled around his bike's chrome, catching on the steel wolf's head mounted on his handlebars. Behind him, 6 members of the Iron Wolves waited, their engines idling with predatory patience. The blind fiddler was still inside, visible through the tavern's foggy windows, as he packed away his violin with methodical precision. "Man's got some nerve," Razor growled, rolling a silver coin between his fingers like a nervous habit. "Everyone else in town's falling in line, but he acts like we don't even exist." Marcus's leather jacket creaked as he shifted, the Iron Wolf on his back catching the last light of day. "Man's either stupid or brave. Don't much care which." The last patron left the tavern, hurrying past the bikers with downcast eyes. Thomas emerged after them, his carved wooden cane tapping a steady rhythm on the worn boards of the porch. He began his nightly ritual of checking the tavern's outer doors, his movements precise despite his blindness. "Time we had a chat with our friendly neighborhood musician," Marcus announced, killing his engine. His boots hit the wooden sidewalk with deliberate force as he dismounted. Inside the tavern, Sarah Connor's hand trembled as she reached for the phone. Michael Bishop stopped her with a gentle touch. "Don't," Michael whispered. "Thomas knows what he's doing." Marcus approached Thomas with the casual menace of a circling wolf, his men spreading out behind him. Nice evening for playing music, old-timer. Thomas continued his methodical check of the doors, his unseeing eyes focused on his task. Every evening's nice for music if you've got the right attitude. Attitude, Marcus chuckled. But there was no humor in it. That's actually what I wanted to discuss. See, some folks in town, they've got the right attitude. They understand how things work now. But you, he kicked Thomas's cane, sending it clattering across the porch. You seem confused about the natural order of things. Thomas paused. His scarred face turned toward the sound of his fallen cane. His voice remained steady, almost conversational. Natural order is a funny thing. Nature's got a way of surprising folks who think they understand it. Razor stepped forward, his face darkening. You threatening us, old man? No, son, Thomas replied, remaining perfectly still despite his missing cane. Just sharing some wisdom, free of charge. Marcus moved closer, using his height to loom over Thomas, but something about the blind man's stillness made him hesitate. Wisdom's got no place in Whisper Valley anymore. Town runs on respect now, and respect, he reached out to shove Thomas's shoulder. Respect has a price. Thomas didn't stumble. He adjusted his stance slightly, and those who knew what to look for might have recognized the subtle shift, the way a soldier moves when contact is imminent. Son, Thomas said quietly, you wouldn't know the first thing about respect. Across the street, David Wilson watched from his ruined music shop, his hands clenching into fists. Next to him, Rebecca Martinez, the town council member, placed a restraining hand on his arm. Don't, she whispered. You'll only make it worse. Marcus recovered quickly, anger replacing his momentary uncertainty. Maybe we need to educate you about respect. Show you what happens to folks who don't understand the new way of things. Aturu, Thomas turned his head slightly, as if listening to something only he could hear. I learned about respect in places you can't imagine, from men you'll never measure up to. His clouded eyes swept over the gang members with unsettling accuracy. Boys playing at being men, thinking fear equals strength. Seen your kind before, in the mountains, in the shadows, all end up the same way. Is that right? Marcus's voice dropped dangerously. And how's that? Forgotten, Thomas replied simply. Because bullies don't leave legacies, they just leave scars, and scars fade. Razor moved forward, hand reaching inside his jacket, but Marcus held up a staying hand. His smile was cold as mountain ice. Strong words for a blind man living on borrowed time. Marcus's eyes moved to the violin case. Be a shame if something happened to your precious fiddle. Accidents happen after all. Thomas's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his stance. The other gang members felt it, even if they couldn't name it. The subtle transformation of a blind musician into something else entirely. That violin's seen worse than you, Thomas said softly. Belonged to my grandfather. He carried it through Gettysburg. 23 men died in the field hospital while he played them home. Real men, warriors. His clouded eyes locked onto Marcus's position with unnerving precision. You touch that violin, son, and you'll learn the difference between playing tough and being tested. For a moment, the only sound was the mountain wind whistling through the valley. Then Marcus laughed, but the sound was forced. Big talk from a blind relic. He backed away, mounting his bike. We'll see how tough you are when the time comes, because it is coming, old man. Count on it. The iron wolves roared away, leaving exhaust and tension hanging in the air. Thomas moved with careful precision to retrieve his cane. His movements, as steady as ever, but those who knew him well could see the change in his bearing, the awakening of something long dormant but never truly forgotten. Inside the tavern, Michael Bishop finally released the breath he'd been holding. Lord Thomas, what are you doing? Sarah's hands shook as she poured coffee. They'll be back. You know they will. Of course they will, Thomas said, entering. The tavern. Men like that always come back. Their pride won't let them do anything else. Sheriff Carter entered, having witnessed the confrontation from down the street. Got a call from Cedar Creek this morning. Iron Wolves burned down a music store there last night. Owner wouldn't pay protection money. Just a matter of time before they do the same here. Rebecca Martinez added, joining them. Town councils. Meeting tonight. They want to discuss accommodation. Thomas's unseeing eyes hardened. Accommodation. Pretty word for surrender. What choice do we have? David asked, his voice bitter. They've got the whole town terrorized. Police can't stop them. No one can. Thomas sipped his coffee, his mind clearly elsewhere. A memory surfaced. Hindu Kush, 2010. His unit pinned down, overwhelming odds, until the radio call that changed everything. Sometimes, he said finally, it's not about stopping them. It's about showing them they're not the only ones who can play rough. He stood, leaving money for his coffee. If you'll excuse me, I need to make a phone call. What kind of phone? Call? Sheriff Carter asked, though something in his expression suggested he already knew. Thomas paused at the door. Just checking in with some old friends, men who haven't forgotten what it means to stand together. His clouded eyes seemed to look beyond the present moment, men who still remember what perfect aim really means. D. As Thomas walked into the gathering darkness, his cane tapping a steady rhythm on the sidewalk, the mountain wind carried the sound of distant thunder. Or perhaps it was motorcycles, coming to learn a lesson about respect that no amount of violence could teach. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Across town, Marcus Stone gathered his Iron Wolves, his pride still stinging from the blind man's defiance. Tonight, he told them, his voice hard with decision, we show Whisper Valley what happens to people who don't respect the natural order. Starting with that damn fiddle. What Marcus couldn't know was that his decision had already set larger forces in motion, forces that had been waiting for just such a moment, just such a reason to remind the world that some skills never fade, and some warriors never truly lay down their arms. The evening deepened over Whisper Valley, the autumn chill carrying whispers of winter through the mountain passes. Thomas McKenna stood in his small cabin's back room, his fingers tracing the carved surface of an old wooden box. Inside lay medals he hadn't touched in years, commendations for actions in places the public would never know about. Next to the box, his satellite phone sat silent, a number he hadn't dialed in a decade written in braille on a card beside it. Through his enhanced hearing, he could detect the Iron Wolves gathering at the far end of Main Street, their bikes idling with predatory anticipation. Just like old times, Thomas murmured to his medals, waiting for the enemy to make their move. The rumble of motorcycles grew louder. Thomas carefully returned the medals to their box and moved to his front porch, his cane tapping a steady rhythm on the wooden boards. Marcus Stone led his gang in a slow parade down Main Street, more bikes than usual, some faces Thomas's acute hearing didn't recognize. Reinforcements called in from other chapters. Sarah was closing the tavern early, her trembling hands audible to Thomas's trained ears as she turned the key. Michael Bishop helped her, both of them moving with the forced quiet of prey, trying not to attract predators. Get home safe, Thomas called out to them, his voice carrying in the mountain air, and stay inside tonight. Michael paused, understanding. In his voice, they're coming for it, aren't they? The violin. Thomas nodded slowly. Been coming since the beginning. Thomas, Sarah's voice caught, maybe just this once. No, Sarah. Thomas's voice was gentle but firm. Some things you can't give up, not ever. The women hurried to their cars, As more motorcycles filled the street, Thomas's trained hearing counted at least 25 riders now, their engines creating a thunderous chorus that echoed off the mountain walls. He could detect Sheriff Carter's patrol car, parked discreetly 2 blocks away, watching but unable to intervene without cause. Marcus dismounted his bike, gathering his lieutenants. Razor passed out dark bottles, their contents sloshing ominously. In the night air, the gang leader's voice carried clearly in the mountain valley. Time to teach Whisper Valley about respect, about consequences. Marcus turned to address his assembled men. Tonight, we show them what happens when people don't. Fall in line. Thomas moved unhurriedly to his back room, his fingers finding the satellite phone with practiced ease. The number, though unused for years, remained fresh in his memory. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Reynolds." "Jack," Thomas said quietly. "It's McKenna. Remember that night in the Hindu Kush when you said I'd never have to stand alone again?" A pause, then a sharp intake of breath. "Jesus, Tom. Been a long time. How bad?" "They're about to destroy it, Jack. The violin, my grandfather's legacy. The one that played through Gettysburg. The one that gave comfort to the dying." Another pause, shorter this time. When Captain Jack Reynolds spoke again, his voice had changed, carrying the familiar tone of command. "Where are you?" "Whisper Valley, West Virginia, Crossroads Tavern on Main Street." "How many?" Thomas's hearing picked up Marcus approaching. His cabin, the sound of glass clinking in the outlaw's hand. 25, maybe more, Iron Wolves MC, mean bunch." "Hold position." Reynolds's voice was steel. "How long can you maintain?" Through his acute hearing, Thomas detected the first bottle being prepared, the sound of cloth being stuffed into its neck. "Got no choice, Jack. It's not just about the violin anymore. It's about everything it represents." 8 hours, Reynolds said firmly. "We're already rolling." "The 8 hours, Thomas confirmed, memories of another mountain range, another desperate hold flooding back. "Copy that, Captain." He set the phone down as the first bottle crashed through his front window. Flames erupted instantly, spreading across the wooden floor. Marcus's voice rose above the crackle of fire. "Come on out, old man. Come watch your precious fiddle burn." Thomas moved calmly through his burning cabin, pausing only to retrieve the box of medals from the back room. Outside, the Iron Wolves had formed a half-circle around the building, their faces lit by the growing flames. "Last chance, old-timer," Marcus called out. "Kneel, or we burn it all." Thomas emerged from the smoke like a ghost, his scarred face illuminated by the flames, his stance straight despite the inferno behind him. The sight of him, calm in the face of destruction, made several gang members shift uneasily. "Son," Thomas's voice carried clearly despite the roar of flames, "you just started a war you can't win." Marcus laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it. "Look around, old man. You're alone. No one's coming to help you." Thomas smiled then, a smile that had nothing to do with humor and everything to do with certainty. "That's where you're wrong, boy. See, there's something you need to understand about old soldiers." As if on cue, a distant rumble began to build, not the chaotic roar of gang bikes, but the disciplined thunder of machines moving in formation. Marcus's head snapped toward the sound, his face showing the first traces of doubt. "We never fight alone," Thomas continued, his words carrying the weight of absolute truth, "and we never, ever forget what perfect aim feels like." The rumble grew louder, and now emergency vehicles were arriving. But they weren't just local. Responders. Military stickers marked many of the trucks, and the men emerging from them moved with the unmistakable precision of Special Forces veterans. "What the hell is this?" Razor demanded, backing toward his bike. "This," Thomas's smile hadn't wavered, "is just the advance party. The real army is still 8 hours out." His clouded eyes locked onto Marcus's position with unnerving accuracy. Remember what I said about respect, son, about the difference between playing tough and being tested. More veterans were arriving by the minute, their presence automatically shifting the balance of power. These weren't weekend warriors or wannabe tough guys. These were men who had mastered the art of warfare in the world's harshest environments. "You're bluffing," Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "No way you could—" "One phone call," Thomas cut him off. "That's all it took. One call to remind my brothers that the violin you just tried to burn, it's not just my legacy. It belongs to all of us, and we've got 100 more just like these men coming to help us protect it." The fire department was working on the cabin now, but the damage was done. Yet Thomas stood unmoved, like a sentinel from another time, his unseeing eyes never leaving Marcus's position. "You've got 8 hours," he said quietly, 8 hours to decide what kind of men you really are, because when Captain Reynolds arrives with the main force, there won't be any more decisions to make. Marcus backed away, his previous bravado evaporating in the face of something he didn't understand. The unshakable calm of a man who had faced far worse than midnight arson and petty intimidation. "Mount up!" he barked to his men, trying to maintain control. "This isn't over, old man." "No," Thomas agreed, listening to their frantic movements with his heightened senses. "It's just beginning." As the Iron Wolves roared away into the night, Sheriff Carter approached Thomas, taking in the scene. The partially burned cabin, the gathering veterans, and the violin case that somehow remained unscathed through it all. "Those men," the sheriff nodded toward the veterans, now securing the area with military precision. "They came awful fast." "Been waiting a long time for my call, James," Thomas replied. "Some debts can never be repaid, some bonds never break." In the distance, more engines could be heard, more veterans arriving, drawn by a network of brotherhood that had laid dormant but never died. Thomas held his grandfather's violin case, his fingers tracing the worn leather with reverence. 8 hours, he murmured, just like the Hindu Kush. Hold the line and wait for reinforcements. The night was far from over, and Whisper Valley was about to learn what real strength looked like. Not the false power of intimidation, but the unshakable force of men united by honor, duty, and debts that transcended time itself. The Iron Wolves compound pulsed with nervous energy as Marcus Stone paced the worn floorboards of their clubhouse. Through grimy windows, he watched his men fortifying the perimeter, their movements lacking their usual swagger. The violin burning had been meant to break the old man's spirit. Instead, it had awakened something none of them understood. 30 bikes just rolled into town, Razor reported, bursting through the door. All veterans, moving in formation like some kind of military unit. Marcus hurled his bottle against the wall. How? How did one phone call bring this many this fast? In the corner, Snake, the gang's intelligence gatherer, looked up from his laptop. "You don't get it, boss. That blind man, I've been doing some digging. Thomas McKenna isn't just some veteran. He was something else entirely in Afghanistan." "Enlighten me," Marcus snarled, his composure cracking. 3 silver stars, 2 purple hearts, led one of the most successful sniper units in Special Forces history. They called him the Ghost of the Hindu Kush, specialized in impossible shots from distances that shouldn't have been possible. Wolf, who'd been quiet until now, cleared his throat. "My cousin was in Afghanistan. Used to talk about a sniper who could hit targets in complete darkness. Said the man could hear a target's position better than most men could see it." "That's not the worst part," Snake continued. "The captain he called, Jack Reynolds, runs the largest veteran motorcycle club on the East Coast. These aren't just old soldiers, boss. These are organized, connected, and they've got chapters everywhere." Marcus's face darkened as the implications sank in. They'd built their reputation on fear, on the assumption that their targets would always be weaker, more afraid. But now, across town, Thomas McKenna stood in front of his partially burned cabin, directing arriving veterans with the same quiet authority he'd used in combat. The cabin had become an impromptu command center, with military precision replacing domestic order. Michael Bishop approached, carrying coffee and sandwiches from the tavern. "Thomas, you need to eat something. Been standing there for hours." "Thanks, Michael." He took the coffee but waved off the food. Seen too many men miss important details because they were focused on their stomachs. A group of 5 motorcycles rolled up, their riders wearing veteran brotherhood patches. The lead rider, a weathered man in his 50s, dismounted and approached. "Thomas, with military bearing." "Master Sergeant James Cooper, sir. Captain Reynolds sent us ahead. We're your advanced recon." Thomas nodded, recognizing the tactical move. "Glad to have you, Sergeant. Town's about 4 miles square. Iron Wolves hold the north end, compound behind the old lumber mill." Cooper pulled out a map, and other veterans gathered around as Thomas detailed the situation with uncanny spatial awareness, his blindness seeming to enhance rather than hinder his tactical understanding. Their formations and responses were automatic, decades of training kicking in like they'd never left. The service. Sheriff Carter watched from his cruiser, amazement crossing his face as Whisper Valley transformed into something resembling a military operation. More veterans arrived every hour, each group integrating seamlessly into the growing force. Inside the tavern, Sarah served coffee to a mix of townspeople and newly arrived veterans, the atmosphere shifting from fear to cautious hope as stories were shared. "I was there," an older veteran told the gathered crowd. "Hindu Kush, 2010. Pinned down behind enemy lines in pitch darkness, no way to spot the hostiles. Everyone said we were done for. Then this shot comes out of nowhere, perfect aim, incomplete. Darkness." Thomas McKenna saved 15 of us that night, using nothing but his hearing to locate and eliminate threats. Never asked for anything in return, just said, "This is what brothers do." Similar stories spread through the tavern as more veterans arrived, each carrying their own memory of the quiet fiddler who'd saved lives, led impossible missions, and never sought recognition. David Wilson burst into the tavern, his face flushed with excitement. "You've got to see this. The mountain roads are full of them. Must be 40 more bikes heading this way." Outside, Thomas stood with Cooper studying the town map through the sergeant's eyes, their tactical discussion flowing smoothly despite Thomas's blindness. "They'll try something before the main force arrives," Thomas observed. "Marcus's pride won't let him wait." "Let them try," Cooper replied grimly. "We've got 20 years of Special Forces experience surrounding that compound. These boys want to play tough. Let's show them what real operators look like." A young veteran approached at a run. "Sir, movement at the compound. Looks like they're splitting up, small groups heading out different directions." Thomas's head tilted slightly, his enhanced hearing already picking up the distant sound of motorcycles. "They're probing our defenses, testing our response time." He turned to Cooper. "Remember Operation Mountain Shadow? Same principle." Cooper grinned. "Like riding a bike, sir. Never forget." He began issuing orders, veterans moving with practiced efficiency to counter the gang's movements. At the compound, Marcus watched his scouts depart, trying to regain control of a situation spiraling beyond his understanding. "Find their weak points," he ordered. "These old men can't cover everything." Snake shifted uncomfortably. "Boss, maybe we should consider pulling back, calling in help from other chapters." "We are the help!" Marcus exploded, his fist striking the wall. "We're the ones people fear. I won't let some blind war relic take that away." But his words lacked their usual conviction. Through the window, he could see more veteran bikes arriving, their formation perfect, their purpose clear. These weren't weekend warriors playing at being tough. These were men who'd faced real combat, real death, and had emerged stronger. Itzo, his cabin's back room. Thomas ran his fingers over his grandfather's violin, the instrument somehow preserved despite the fire. The satellite phone rang. Reynolds checking in. "How's it looking, Tom?" "Like old times, Jack. They're testing us, looking for weakness, just like the Taliban at Forward Operating Base Echo." Reynolds's voice carried a hint of grim amusement. "Remember what you told me that night about the difference between thugs and warriors?" Thomas smiled slightly. "Warriors understand that strength isn't about intimidation. It's about precision, about knowing exactly when and how to act." "We're 5 hours out, 200 strong. Can you hold?" Thomas listened to the veterans moving with practiced precision outside, securing positions, establishing communications, transforming Whisper Valley into a fortress. "Oh, we'll hold. These boys are about to learn the difference between intimidation and real strength." The Iron Wolves' first probe came from the east. 5 bikes running dark, trying to slip through the veterans' perimeter. They made it 3 blocks before finding their path blocked by parked trucks arranged with military precision. As they turned to find another route, more vehicles moved silently into position behind them. "Like fish in a barrel," Cooper muttered into his radio, watching from his elevated position. "Just like you said, Thomas. They're thinking like thugs, not soldiers." Thomas's voice crackled back, calm as ever. "Pride makes men predictable." "How many?" 5 bikes, 10 men, looking real nervous now that they realize they're boxed in. The trapped bikers gathered in a tight circle, their hushed arguments carrying clearly in the night air. Veterans watched silently from concealed positions, their discipline evident in their stillness. "Boss, this was a mistake," one of the trapped bikers hissed. "These ain't normal folks we're dealing with. They're playing chess while we're playing checkers." Before his companion could respond, bright lights suddenly flooded the street from all directions. The bikers found themselves illuminated from every angle, while their observers remained hidden in darkness. A voice cut through the night, carrying the unmistakable tone of military command. "Gentlemen," Cooper called out, "I suggest you consider your next move very carefully." At the Iron Wolves compound, Marcus paced nervously as he waited for reports. The radio crackled with his trapped men's voices, their fear evident even through the static. "They've got us surrounded, boss. These guys, they're different, moving like a real military unit." Snake watched Marcus's face darken. "We should pull everyone back, regroup while we can." "Shut up!" Marcus hurled a chair across the room. "I won't let some blind man make us look weak." "Too late for that," Wolf muttered, earning a murderous glare from his leader. Across town at the burned cabin, Thomas coordinated the veterans' movements with the same quiet efficiency he'd used in Afghanistan. The backroom had transformed into a tactical operations center, with communications equipment covering every surface. "Echo team reports movement from the north," a veteran radio operator announced. "Larger group this time, maybe 15 bikes." Thomas tilted his head, his enhanced hearing confirming the report. "They're getting desperate, trying to overwhelm one section of our perimeter." He keyed his radio. "All units be advised. Main. Thrust coming from the north, but watch your flanks. This is probably a diversion." As if confirming his words, the sound of motorcycles roared from the north. But these weren't the stealthy approaches of before. This was a full-on charge, the Iron Wolves apparently abandoning subtlety for brute force. "Here they come," Cooper's voice crackled over the radio. 15 bikes moving fast, no tactical formation, just raw speed. Thomas's voice remained steady, his enhanced hearing tracking the approaching bikes with remarkable precision. "Just like we planned. Let them through the first line." The charging bikers roared past the initial veteran positions, their whoops of triumph dying in their throats as they realized they were being channeled, not evading. Steel cables suddenly pulled taut across side streets, forcing them down a predetermined path. "Now," Thomas commanded. Veterans emerged from doorways and alleys, moving with coordinated precision. Police cars appeared at intersections. Lights, flashing. Within moments, the Iron Wolves' charge had been contained in a 4-block area, completely surrounded. "What the hell is this?" one of the trapped bikers demanded. "This," Thomas's voice carried clearly as he stepped forward, his scarred face illuminated by streetlights, "is what real tactical planning looks like." The blind veteran stood calmly. In the street, surrounded by men who moved with the deadly grace of trained operators, the contrast between their disciplined presence and the gang's chaotic charge couldn't have been clearer. "Last chance," Thomas announced. "Surrender your bikes, walk away, no charges filed, no consequences. Continue this fight, and you'll learn why they called me the ghost of the Hindu Kush." One of the younger bikers, barely in his 20s, suddenly gunned his engine and charged directly at Thomas. Before anyone could react, Thomas's head tilted slightly, tracking the approaching bike by sound alone. His cane moved with lightning speed, and 3 veterans responded in perfect coordination. The bike's front wheel was swept out, its rider expertly detained, the entire incident over in seconds. "That's one choice," Thomas commented mildly, his cane returning to its normal position. "Anyone else want to test their luck against men who've spent decades perfecting the art of warfare?" Back at the compound, Marcus listened to his men's radio calls with growing desperation. "Fall back!" he screamed into the radio. "Everyone fall back!" But it was too late. The veterans had predicted this too, cutting off escape routes with the same military precision that had trapped them. One by one, Iron Wolves members found themselves facing a choice: surrender or escalate against opponents who clearly outmatched them. "Boss," Razor's voice shook slightly over the radio. "We've lost contact with the North team. The East team's surrounded. This isn't working." Marcus's world was crumbling. He'd built his power on fear and intimidation. But these men, these veterans, seemed immune to both. Worse, they were systematically dismantling his gang's reputation with each perfectly executed maneuver. In the tavern, townspeople watched through windows as the veterans efficiently contained the gang's attempted show of force. Sarah stood with Michael and others, amazement on their faces. "My God," Sarah whispered. "Look at them move, like they've been doing this together for years." "They have," Sheriff Carter replied, watching with professional appreciation. "Just not here, not recently, but some skills you never forget." Thomas's voice came over the radio again, addressing the surrounded bikers. "Captain Reynolds's main force is 3 hours out. When they arrive, this ends one way or another. Choice is yours, how it ends." The trapped Iron Wolves members looked at each other, their usual bravado replaced by uncertainty. They were used to being the predators, not the prey. Now they found themselves caught in a trap laid by men who'd learned their trade in the hardest school imaginable. One biker, older than the others, suddenly switched off his engine. "I'm done," he announced, climbing off his bike. "My old man was in Afghanistan. He told me stories about men like these. We ain't winning this fight, boys." Others began following his lead, the clatter of kickstands hitting pavement spreading like falling dominoes. The veterans maintained their positions, professional to the end, as Whisper Valley witnessed the beginning of the Iron Wolves MC's unraveling. At the burned cabin, Thomas monitored the surrenders through his acute hearing. "Cooper, get those. Men processed and released, but keep their bikes. Consider it collateral for good behavior." "Copy that," Cooper replied. "What about the compound?" Thomas's unseeing eyes turned north, where Marcus Stone and his inner circle still held out. "Marcus has got 3 hours to decide if his pride is worth what's coming. Because Jack Reynolds isn't coming alone, and he's not coming to negotiate." The night was far from over, but already the balance of power had shifted decisively. The Iron Wolves MC had learned the hard way that real strength wasn't about intimidation. It was about discipline, strategy, and the unbreakable bonds forged in combat. Sarah approached Thomas with fresh coffee, her hands steady now, for the first time in months. "When did you know?" she asked softly. "Know what?" Thomas replied, though his slight smile suggested he understood her question. "That this would work, that they'd come if you called." Thomas's scarred face turned toward the mountain wind, his enhanced senses picking up the distant sound of more approaching motorcycles. "Some debts transcend time, Sarah. Some bonds never break. When a man saves your life in complete darkness, using nothing but his hearing to guide his shots, you don't forget. You don't hesitate when he calls." He paused, his acute hearing picking up Marcus's increasingly frantic radio transmissions from the compound. "And you never, ever let him stand alone against the dark." The autumn wind carried the sound of more veterans arriving, their disciplined approach a sharp contrast to the gang's earlier chaos. Whisper Valley was changing, transformed not just by force but by example. And as the night deepened, Thomas McKenna stood watch, his enhanced senses monitoring every movement, every sound, waiting for Marcus Stone to make his final choice. Surrender with dignity, or learn firsthand why they'd called him the ghost of the Hindu Kush. The Iron Wolves compound simmered with tension as midnight approached. Marcus Stone stood at his office window, watching his remaining forces drift between buildings like lost shadows. The night's failures had shattered their confidence, stripped away their aura of invincibility. Through breaks in the autumn clouds, he could see veterans still holding their positions, their discipline unwavering in the mountain cold. 8 more gone, Razor reported, entering the office. Just walked out during shift change, left their cuts on their bikes. Marcus's fist crashed into the wall. "Cowards!" But his voice carried more desperation than anger now. "After everything we built here—" "Built?" Snake challenged from his corner, speaking with newfound boldness. "We didn't build anything, Marcus. We just took through fear. Now we're meeting men who learned about real fear in places like the Hindu Kush and Kandahar." At the burned cabin, Thomas studied updated positions on his mental map as Michael Bishop brought fresh situation reports. The night's encounters had proven their tactical superiority, but he knew Marcus's desperation made him dangerous. "Another group just surrendered at the south checkpoint," Michael announced. "Young ones, mostly, saying they never signed up for this kind of fight." Thomas nodded, unsurprised. Fear holds men together only until they find something stronger to believe in. Cooper entered, his face showing contained excitement. "Just got word from the advance riders. Captain Reynolds. Force is something to see, Thomas. Over 200 bikes moving in perfect formation. State police are actually escorting them." Thomas allowed himself a small smile. Jack always did know how to make an entrance. "How long?" "Hour and a half tops, already getting reports. From towns they've passed through. People lining the streets, watching them pass like an army on the move. In the tavern, now serving as an impromptu community center, townspeople gathered to share information and draw strength from the veterans' presence. David Wilson stood before the crowd, his earlier fear replaced by determination. "All these years," he addressed the gathered citizens, "we thought we were weak because we couldn't stand up to them. But look around. Look what happened when one man refused to back down, when one phone call brought an army of heroes to our door." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as she worked, remembering all the time she'd served the Iron Wolves with trembling hands. "Never seen anything like it," she told her customers. "The way these veterans move, the way they work together, like they never stopped being soldiers." Outside, more Iron Wolves members approached the veterans' lines, hands raised in surrender. The night's failed attacks had shown them the futility of resistance. Each coordinated veteran response had demonstrated the difference between practiced intimidation and real combat experience. Razor watched from the compound as 3 more of their members walked away. His hand unconsciously touched the dog tags hidden under his cut, his brother's tags from Afghanistan. The older man had tried to teach him about honor, about real brotherhood. Somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten those lessons. "They're coming apart at the seams," Cooper reported to Thomas. Psychological impact of watching real operators work, making them question everything they thought they knew about strength. Thomas's mind flickered back to another time, another siege, forward operating base Echo, where he'd first met Reynolds. Their unit surrounded, outgunned, but holding together through something stronger than fear. "Get me a direct line to the compound," he instructed. "Time to remind Marcus what real choices look like." The call went through on the compounds. "Main line," Marcus answered with a snarl. "What? Marcus?" Thomas's voice was calm, reasonable. "You've lost most of your men. The ones still with you are scared, questioning everything. Captain Reynolds's force is less than 2 hours out. Time to think about how this ends." "It ends with me burning everything you care about, old man." "No, son," Thomas replied patiently. "It ends one of 2 ways. You surrender now, walk away with some dignity intact, or you face 200 combat veterans who've spent decades perfecting the arts of war. Men who fought real battles, not just terrorized small towns." In the compound, Razor watched Marcus's face contort with rage, but beneath the anger, he saw something else. Fear. The same fear he felt himself, facing men who'd learned their trade in the world's harshest training grounds. His brother's dog tags felt heavy against his chest, a reminder of different values, different kinds of strength. At the tavern, an older veteran was sharing stories with spellbound townspeople. "Hindu Kush, 2010. We were surrounded, running low on everything. Radio squawks, some crazy snipers coming in. Complete darkness, enemy fire everywhere. Thomas McKenna makes 20 perfect shots in pitch black, using nothing but his hearing. Saves our whole unit. Next day he comes back, and the next, never left a man behind." Sheriff Carter entered the burned cabin, taking in the professional operation. The veterans had established. "Got state police reports. Reynolds' group passed through Charleston 30 minutes ago. It's something else. Bikes stretching for miles, all veterans, all moving like one unit." Thomas listened to the reports, his enhanced hearing building. A perfect tactical picture, just like he had in Afghanistan, just like Reynolds had taught him. "Keep the pressure on the compound," he instructed. "Let them see their world shrinking. Fear's always been their weapon. Time they felt it themselves." Outside, the midnight moon painted the mountain valley in silver light. Whisper Valley was waking to a changed world. Where once the Iron Wolves had ruled through intimidation, now veterans moved with quiet authority. Their presence a reminder of what real strength looked like. At the compound, Marcus's control continued to erode. More men slipped away with each passing hour, choosing surrender over a hopeless last stand. The remaining diehards watched the veterans' positions with growing unease, too late understanding the difference between playing at being warriors and facing real ones. The mountain wind carried the distant rumble of approaching motorcycles, the sound growing steadily louder with each passing minute. Thomas stood on his burned cabin's porch, his acute hearing painting a precise picture of Reynolds' approaching force. The disciplined formation of 200 bikes moving as one unit sent vibrations through the valley that his enhanced senses could read like a tactical map. "My God," Michael whispered, joining Thomas on the porch. "Listen to that. Sounds like an army coming." "That's exactly what it is," Thomas replied quietly. "Men who never forgot their oath, their brotherhood, or their debts." The sound grew louder, and now they could see them. Bikes appearing over Mountain Pass Road, their formation perfect, their riders moving as one unit. At their head, a tall figure on a massive black Harley-Davidson led the column. Captain Jack Reynolds had arrived, and he'd brought the full might of the veteran brotherhood with him. Inside the compound, Marcus Stone stood frozen at his window, watching the seemingly endless stream of motorcycles pour into Whisper Valley. These weren't the chaotic, intimidating displays his gang used. This was military precision, each rider knowing their exact position, their exact role. Jesus Christ, Razor breathed, counting the bikes. Must be over 200 of them. All combat veterans, all moving like they've trained for this their whole lives. Snake joined them at the window, his face pale. "Boss, that's it. Game over. We can't fight this. These aren't weekend warriors or wannabes. These are the real deal." The Veterans Brotherhood filled Main Street, their bikes arranged in perfect formation. Reynolds dismounted, his movements carrying the same authority they had in Afghanistan. He removed his helmet, revealing silver hair and eyes that had seen too much war to be intimidated by playground bullies. Thomas stepped forward as Reynolds approached, the two men facing each other in the mountain night. For a moment, neither spoke, decades of shared combat and sacrifice passing between them. "Looks like you started the party without me," Reynolds said finally, a slight smile crossing his weathered face. "Had to give them a preview, Jack, show them what real operators look like." Reynolds surveyed the town, taking in the controlled positions, the strategic placements. Just like Fob Echo, you always did know how to hold the line. From the tavern, townspeople watched in awe as more veterans continued to arrive, each group smoothly integrating into predetermined positions. Inside the compound, the remaining Iron Wolves were crumbling. The sight of such overwhelming force, deployed with such precision, shattered their remaining illusions of power. "We can still fight," Marcus insisted, but his voice carried the hollow ring of desperation. "We've got weapons, we've got nothing," Razor cut him off. "Look at them, Marcus. Really look. Those men out there, they fought real battles, faced real enemies. We're nothing but kids playing dress-up to them." Reynolds walked the line with Thomas, greeting veterans he'd served with, assessing the situation with practiced eyes. "Your message said they tried to destroy the violin, the one from Gettysburg." Thomas nodded grimly. "Same one that played for dying soldiers, same one we used to signal positions in the dark, same one that's given comfort to warriors for over a century." "Damn!" Reynolds' face hardened. "They have no idea what that violin means, do they? What it represents?" "They're about to learn." Inside the compound, Razor made his decision. His brother's dog tag seemed to burn against his chest. A reminder of different values, different kinds of strength. He turned to the remaining members. "I'm walking out. Anyone with sense will come with me." "Traitor!" Marcus snarled, reaching for him, but Snake stepped between them. "He's right. Boss, look out there, really look. Those men aren't playing games. They're not trying to look tough. They are tough, and they're giving us a chance to walk away with some dignity intact." More members began moving toward the door, their resolve broken by the overwhelming display of real military might outside. Marcus watched helplessly as his control evaporated. At the burned cabin, Thomas and Reynolds studied updated positions on the tactical maps Cooper provided. A situation report came in, the veteran's voice carrying the crisp efficiency of a career soldier. "Compound's nearly isolated. We've got clean lines of sight from 3 positions. State police have blocked all exit routes, except the one we're leaving open for surrenders." Reynolds nodded approval. "Clean operation, Tom. Just like the old days." "Had good teachers," Thomas replied. "Learned from the best at Echo." The captain's eyes clouded with memory. "That night, when you heard the Taliban moving in complete darkness, everyone said it was impossible to take those shots, but you came through. Every single one perfect." "Had to." Thomas gripped his old friend's shoulder. "You were down there, and now you're here for me, 200 strong, every man ready to show these boys what real warriors look like." Outside, the moon climbed higher as more Iron Wolves members emerged from the compound, hands raised in surrender. Veterans processed them efficiently, professional to the end. The sight of such overwhelming force, deployed with such precision, had accomplished what no amount of negotiation could. Chief Sawyer approached Thomas and Reynolds, shaking his head in amazement. Never seen anything like it. They're just giving up, walking out like their strings have been cut. Fear only works until something stronger comes along, Reynolds observed. These boys built their power on intimidation. Now they're facing men who've stared down real enemies, faced real death. Changes the equation. In the compound, Marcus Marshall watched his world collapse. Through the compound's windows, Marcus could see the veterans' brotherhood maintaining their positions, their discipline unwavering. The contrast with his own scattered, demoralized forces couldn't have been starker. Razor paused at the door, looking back at his former leader. "Last chance, boss. There's no shame in surrendering to better men." But Marcus's face had transformed into a mask of pure rage. "Better men? They're nothing, and I'll prove it. I'll show everyone what real power looks like." The change in his voice made Razor's blood run cold. "Marcus, what did you do?" "Insurance policy." Marcus's laugh carried an edge of madness. "Old man wants his precious violin. Let's see how he likes it when the whole valley burns instead." Outside, Thomas and Reynolds continued coordinating the veterans' positions when Razor burst from the compound, running full tilt toward their lines. "He's rigged the place!" Razor shouted. "The whole compound, explosives, fuel tanks, everything. He's going to burn it all down." The war for Whisper Valley had entered its final phase, but Marcus's desperate gambit threatened to turn victory into catastrophe. Now Thomas and Reynolds faced a familiar challenge, saving lives in the face of overwhelming odds, just as they had decades ago in the mountains of Afghanistan. The mountain air crackled with tension as Thomas and Reynolds processed razors. "Warning! Veterans moved with practiced efficiency, their training kicking in automatically as they secured the perimeter around the compound." "Talk fast," Reynolds commanded Razor. "What exactly are we dealing with?" Razor's words tumbled out, his former arrogance replaced by genuine fear. "Propane tanks rigged throughout the building, fuel drums in the garage, makeshift explosives. Marcus has been planning this for weeks, said if he couldn't control the valley, he'd burn it to the ground." Thomas's mind was already calculating distances, wind direction, potential blast radius. How many still inside? Maybe 12 diehards, true believers. But they don't know about the explosives. Marcus kept that between himself and a couple of trusted men. Cooper approached with an updated situation map. Compound's got clear lines to 3 gas stations within blast radius. "If those tanks go up, half the town burns," Reynolds finished grimly. "Same trick the insurgents tried at Echo." Thomas nodded, memories of that night surfacing. "And we handle it the same way." "Cooper, get evacuation started. Anyone within 6 blocks needs to move now." Sheriff Carter stepped forward. "Already coordinating with state police. We can have roads cleared in 20 minutes. Inside the compound, Marcus paced like a caged animal, watching veterans securing the perimeter. Snake observed from the doorway, his face showing growing concern as he noted the propane tanks and fuel drums scattered throughout the building. "Boss," Snake ventured carefully, "what exactly are you planning here?" Marcus's laugh carried an edge of hysteria. "Planning? I'm planning to show them what real power looks like. They think they're so special with their military precision and their combat experience. Let's see how they handle this." At the burned cabin, Thomas and Reynolds gathered their core team. Veterans who'd faced similar situations in combat listened intently as Razor detailed the compound's layout. "Main cache is here," he indicated on the map. "Garage area. But he's got smaller charges throughout the building. Remote detonators. Marcus has got the trigger." Sarah and Michael helped coordinate the evacuation, their fear tempered by the calm efficiency of the veterans organizing the movement. Town residents who'd lived under the Iron Wolves' shadow for so long now witnessed what real leadership looked like. Look at them, Sarah marveled. No panic, no shouting, just getting things done. That's the difference, Michael replied softly, between men who pretend to be powerful and men who know real responsibility. Thomas studied the compound through his enhanced hearing, his mind working through scenarios. Jack, remember Kandahar, the ammunition depot? Reynolds' eyes lit with understanding. 3-point containment, but we'll need a distraction, something to keep Marcus's attention while we get teams in position. Already got that covered, Thomas turned to Razor. You said Marcus is focused on me, on making me pay for standing up to him. Razor nodded. It's all he talks about. How you humiliated him, how he'll show everyone what happens to people who disrespect the Iron Wolves. Good, Thomas's voice carried the same calm it had in Afghanistan. Then let's give him what he wants. Let him focus on me, while real operators do what they do best. Cooper began organizing teams, veterans moving with practiced coordination. Each man knew his role, understood the stakes. They'd faced similar challenges in combat, learned their lessons in the harshest possible school. Inside the compound, Snake watched Marcus's deteriorating mental state with growing alarm. The gang leader's face was covered in sweat, his hands shaking as he clutched the detonator. They think they can just walk in here, Marcus muttered. Think they can take everything we built, show everyone how weak we are. Well, they'll see. Everyone will see. Marcus, Snake tried again. Think about what you're doing. This isn't about respect anymore. This is mass murder. Shut up! Marcus whirled on him. You're just like the others, weak, scared of these old men and their war stories. Not scared of them, Snake replied quietly. Scared of you, of what you've become. Outside, the evacuation proceeded with military efficiency. Veterans coordinated with police, ensuring clear routes and maintaining order. There was no panic, no chaos, just the smooth operation of men who'd learned to handle crisis situations. Thomas keyed, his radio, his voice carrying to all veterans in position. Remember what this is about, not just protecting the town now. We're fighting to save lives, including those boys inside who got caught up in something bigger than they understood. Reynolds gathered the assault teams, men who'd conducted similar operations in combat. 3 teams, silent entry. Priority is locating and securing those explosives. Team leaders coordinate your approaches. Razor provided final details about the compound's layout, his conscience finally overriding his gang loyalty. Side entrance has a blind spot. Marcus never fixed it because he didn't think anyone would dare come at us that way. Arrogance makes men sloppy, Reynolds observed. Thomas, you ready to play your part? Thomas checked his mental map, calculating angles and timing, just as he had in countless combat situations. Get your men in position. Give me 10 minutes to get Marcus's attention, then execute. Michael approached as the teams moved out, concern evident in his voice. Thomas, you're not really going to confront him alone. Not alone, Thomas replied, listening to veterans take their positions with practiced precision. Got 200 brothers out there, just like always. The mountain moon climbed higher over Whisper Valley as final preparations were made. Veterans moved like shadows through the evacuated streets, their movements coordinated by decades of training and experience. Inside the compound, Marcus Stone clutched his detonator, believing himself in control, unaware that real warriors were already closing in. The next 10 minutes would determine the fate of Whisper Valley, but for Thomas McKenna and his brothers in arms, it was just another mission, another chance to prove that real strength wasn't about intimidation or destruction. Reynolds's final words crackled over the radio. Just like old times, Thomas. Copy that, Thomas replied, starting his walk toward the compound. Time to show these boys what real operators look like. Thomas McKenna walked alone toward the Iron Wolves compound, his steps measured and deliberate. Through concealed earpieces, veterans tracked his movement while taking their own positions. Marcus Stone watched Thomas's approach through dirty windows, the detonator clutched in his trembling hand. "Look at him," he snarled to his remaining loyalists. "Still thinks he can just walk in here like he owns the place." Snake studied Marcus's deteriorating state with growing concern. The gang leader's eyes were wild, sweat beading on his forehead despite the mountain chill. Thomas stopped 30 yards from the compound's main entrance, his voice carrying clearly across the empty street. "Time to end this, Marcus. You've got 12 men in there who don't need to die today." "Shut up!" Marcus screamed through a broken window. "You don't get to make demands. Not anymore." "Not making demands, son," Thomas replied calmly, "offering you a choice. Same choice I offered another young man back in 2010. He was scared too, surrounded, thinking he had no way out." Reynolds's voice crackled in Thomas's earpiece. "Teams moving. Keep him focused." Through the compound's back sections, veterans moved like ghosts, their movements honed by years of combat experience. Each man knew his role, understood the stakes. They located charges and explosives with practiced efficiency, silently neutralizing Marcus's deadly insurance policy. "I'm not scared," Marcus's voice cracked with tension. "I'm in control. Me. You want to see control?" He thrust the detonator out the window. "One click and this whole valley burns." Thomas maintained his steady stance, remembering another standoff, another desperate man with explosives. "That what you want, Marcus? To be remembered as the man who murdered 12 of your own brothers? Because that's all you'll accomplish here." Inside, Snake watched the confrontation unfold while slowly positioning himself closer to Marcus. He could see movement in his peripheral vision, veterans silently securing the building's danger points, but Marcus, focused entirely on Thomas, noticed nothing. "They're not my brothers," Marcus was screaming now. "Brothers don't betray each other. Brothers don't walk away." "Real brothers," Thomas replied calmly, "stop each other from making mistakes they can't take back. Real brothers stand together against chaos, not create it." Reynolds' voice came through again. "West section clear, moving to garage area." Outside the evacuation perimeter, townspeople watched the drama unfold. Sarah gripped Michael's hand as they observed Thomas standing alone before the compound. But Michael saw what others might miss, the subtle movements of veterans taking positions, the coordinated response of men who'd done this before. "Look at them," Michael whispered. "Like a dance they've practiced their whole lives." In the compound's garage area, veterans discovered the main cache of explosives, their movements precise and professional. Each man drew on years of explosive ordnance experience. Reynolds coordinated their efforts while maintaining radio contact with Thomas. "Your call almost cost me everything," Marcus continued, waving the detonator. "My reputation, my power, my control over this town." "That's where you're wrong, son." Thomas's voice carried a father's patience. "You never had control, just fear, and fear always fades when real strength shows up." Snake saw his moment approaching. Marcus's attention was completely focused on Thomas, his grip on the detonator loosening slightly with each wave of his hand. Behind them, veterans had nearly finished securing the compound's explosives. "You think you're so special?" Marcus's laugh bordered on hysteria. "You and your war stories, your brothers in arms. Let's see how special you feel when this whole place goes up." "Team 1 clear," Reynolds' voice reported. "Team 2 securing final charges. Snake, you're up." The moment arrived with stunning swiftness. As Marcus raised the detonator for emphasis, Snake moved. His hand caught Marcus's wrist, while his other arm wrapped around the gang leader's chest. The detonator clattered to the floor as both men went down in a tangle of limbs. "Now!" Reynolds commanded. Veterans burst through doorways and windows with coordinated precision. The remaining Iron Wolves members, already demoralized, offered no resistance. Within seconds, the compound was secured. Thomas entered to find Marcus pinned under Snake's weight, the gang leader's face pressed against dirty floorboards. The detonator lay harmlessly across the room, its threat neutralized. Like the explosives it had been meant to trigger. Marcus struggled beneath Snake's firm hold, spittle flying as he screamed, "You're dead. You hear me? You're all dead." "No, son," Thomas replied quietly, his unseeing eyes fixed on the exact spot where Marcus lay. "We're very much alive. Just like those men you were ready to sacrifice. Just like the town you were willing to burn." Reynolds entered, professional satisfaction evident in his bearing. Compounds clear, all explosives secured, no casualties. Thomas nodded, studying Marcus's contorted face with his enhanced hearing, detecting every ragged breath, every tremor of defeated rage. "You know what the difference is between real operators and men playing war games," Thomas continued, his voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. "Real operators understand that strength isn't about how much damage you can do, it's about how much you can prevent." And DeRazor appeared in the doorway, his brother's dog tags catching the moonlight. "All charges are accounted for, sir. State police are moving in now." Outside, the mountain wind swept through Whisper Valley as police vehicles approached with lights flashing. The veterans maintained their positions, professional to the end. Town residents began emerging from the evacuation zone, watching as the Iron Wolves' reign of terror ended not with an explosion, but with a whimper. "Get him up, Thomas," instructed Snake. "Sheriff Carter will want to have a long talk about attempted mass murder." As police led Marcus away, Reynolds joined Thomas by the window. Together they watched veterans and townspeople mingling in the street, the barriers of fear finally broken. "Just like old times," Reynolds observed. "Different mountains, same principle," Thomas replied. "Different outcome too," Reynolds added. "This time we saved everyone, even the enemy." Snake approached, uncertainty in his stance. "Sir, what happens now? To us?" Thomas studied the young man who'd chosen right over loyalty at the crucial moment. "That depends on you, son. Real strength means facing consequences, learning from mistakes. You showed real strength today." The morning breeze carried the sound of motorcycles, not the threatening roar of gang bikes, but the disciplined rumble of veterans maintaining their positions. Whisper Valley was transformed, not just by the presence of warriors, but by the demonstration of what real strength looked like. Sarah opened the tavern early, serving coffee to exhausted veterans and relieved townspeople. The morning light, streaming through the windows, seemed brighter somehow, as if the shadow that had hung over the town had physically lifted. "I still can't believe it," she told Michael as they watched Snake help an elderly veteran with his gear. "Remember how that boy used to strut around here, threatening everyone?" "People can change," Michael replied, "when they're shown a better way." The tavern's door opened as Cooper entered, now the designated commander of Whisper Valley's veteran presence. His bearing carried authority without intimidation, strength without threat. "Got word from Cedar Creek," he announced to Thomas. "They're having similar problems, asking if we can help set up something like what we've got here." Thomas sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "What does Reynolds say?" "Captain's already organizing. Says Whisper Valley can be a model for other towns, show them what real community protection looks like." Outside, Razor was leading a group of former Iron Wolves members through their morning routine, cleaning streets, helping elderly residents, learning what real service meant. Each wore a plain leather jacket with a small American flag patch, their first step toward earning real respect. "It's not just about keeping order," Razor explained to his group. "It's about building something worth protecting." The morning's peace was briefly interrupted by the rumble of unfamiliar motorcycles. a small gang from 2 counties over, testing Whisper Valley's new reputation. They made it 3 blocks before finding themselves surrounded by veterans and reformed gang members moving with coordinated precision. "Heard this was Iron Wolves' territory," the lead rider sneered. "Not anymore." Snake stepped forward, his stance carrying new confidence. "This is a protected community. Suggest you move on." The wannabe tough guys took in the scene, veterans positioned with tactical precision, former gang members standing alongside them, townspeople watching without fear. They left quickly, their bravado deflated by the sight of real strength. "Well handled," Thomas told Snake afterward. "Didn't need threats or violence, just showed them what they were facing." "Learned from the best," Snake replied. "Still learning." Day at the newly established Veterans Outpost, once the Iron Wolves compound, Reynolds' latest communication was being discussed. The captain had been expanding the program, using Whisper Valley's transformation as a blueprint for other troubled communities. 6 towns now, Cooper reported, all asking for help setting up similar programs. "Captain says we're changing the whole concept of community protection." Thomas listened to the mountain wind, his enhanced senses painting a picture of a town, awakening to new possibilities. "Got something else to show you?" Cooper said. He led Thomas to the outpost's main room. Though Thomas couldn't see them, he knew the walls, once covered in gang insignia, now displayed something very different. "Photographs of Whisper Valley's transformation," Cooper explained, before and after shots showing the town's journey. "From fear to freedom, making sure we never forget where we started, how far we've come." The afternoon brought Reynolds himself, riding in with a small escort to evaluate the program's progress. The captain's presence still commanded respect, but now it was mixed with genuine affection from the townspeople. "Like a different world," Reynolds observed as Thomas walked him through town. "These boys," he nodded toward Snake and Razor working with other reformed gang members, "they're really changing." "They're learning," Thomas replied. "Same way. We did, through service, through understanding what real brotherhood means." They paused at the tavern, listening to the mix of voices inside. The fear that had once permeated every interaction was gone, replaced by the warm hum of community. "You know," Reynolds said thoughtfully, "when you made that call, I thought we were just coming to run off some thugs, never expected to start a movement." "Sometimes the biggest changes come from the smallest moments," Thomas replied. "One phone call, one stand against wrong." As evening approached, Whisper Valley settled into its new routine. Veterans and reformed gang members conducted their security patrols. The tavern filled with a mix of voices sharing stories and lessons. The violin that had sparked it all sang again each night, its music now a symbol of the town's rediscovered soul. "You know what the real difference is?" Michael asked Thomas as they listened to the Sunset Patrol pass by. "It's not just about being protected. It's about being part of something bigger, something better." Thomas nodded, remembering another sunset, another time when men had stood together against chaos. "That's what real strength is," he said quietly. "Not standing alone, but standing together. Not just fighting against something, but fighting for something." The evening light painted Whisper Valley in shades of gold, highlighting a community transformed not just by force, but by example. Sarah's Tavern had become more than just a gathering place. It was now a symbol of the town's rebirth, where veterans and townspeople shared meals and stories, where former enemies learned to become brothers. "Never thought I'd see the day," Sarah told Cooper as they watched Snake helping an elderly veteran with his motorcycle. "Remember how that boy used to terrorize this place?" "People can surprise you," Cooper replied, "when they're shown a better path." The veterans' presence had changed more than just the town's security. They brought with them a sense of purpose, of dignity that spread through the community like ripples in a mountain pond. Former Iron Wolves members, under the guidance of veterans, began community service programs. They learned that respect earned through service was far more satisfying than fear commanded through violence. "It's strange," Razor told Thomas during an evening patrol. "Used to think strength was about making people afraid. Now I understand it's about making them feel safe." The transformation wasn't just external. The transformation wasn't just external. The town itself seemed to stand taller, its people walking with new confidence. The veterans had shown them that courage wasn't about the absence of fear, but about standing together despite it. Thomas continued his nightly performances at the tavern, but now his music carried a different meaning. Each note spoke of redemption, of the possibility of change, of the strength found in unity. "Your playing's different," Michael observed one evening. "Stronger somehow." "The music's always been strong," Thomas replied, his fingers moving across the strings with practiced precision. "Now it just has more people listening with their hearts instead of their fears." The veteran presence had become a permanent part of Whisper Valley's fabric. They weren't just protectors, they were teachers, mentors, examples of what service truly meant. Cooper established regular training sessions, teaching both veterans and reformed gang members the principles of community protection. "It's not about controlling people," he explained during one session. "It's about serving them, protecting them, showing them what real strength looks like." The changes spread beyond Whisper Valley's borders. Other towns, hearing of their transformation, began reaching out. They saw in Whisper Valley a model of what their own communities could become. "Got 3 more requests this week," Reynolds told Thomas during his next visit. "Towns asking for help setting up similar programs." "Send them," Thomas replied, "but make sure they understand this isn't just about security. It's about transformation, about giving people a chance to become something better than they were." The Veterans Outpost, once the Iron Wolves compound, became a training center for this new approach to community protection. Snake, who'd once been Marcus's lieutenant, now led classes on the difference between intimidation and true strength. "I used to think power came from making people fear you," he told his students. "Now I understand it comes from making them trust you." The evening patrols became community events, with veterans and reformed gang members walking together, greeting residents, building the bonds that true security required. "This is what we were really looking for," Razor admitted to Thomas. "Even if we didn't know it, not control but belonging, not fear but respect." 3 months into Whisper Valley's transformation, the first real challenge to the Veterans Program arrived with the subtlety of a mountain viper. Thomas McKenna noticed it first, his enhanced hearing picking up unfamiliar vehicles conducting surveillance, professional observers watching training sessions, men with the hard eyes of organized crime soldiers monitoring veteran movements. "They're probing our defenses," Reynolds observed during their morning briefing at the outpost, "testing response times, looking for weaknesses, just like we used to see in the Hindu Kush." Cooper spread surveillance photos across the command center table. "Got reports from 6 other towns in our network. Same pattern, organized, coordinated. This isn't random." Thomas studied the evidence with the same tactical awareness that had kept him alive in Afghanistan. "The cartels have finally decided. We're a real threat to their operation. Question is, what's their play?" The answer came that afternoon as Snake rushed into the outpost, his face tight with concern. "Just got word from our contacts in Cedar Creek. Cartel enforcers moved in last night, tried to intimidate the veteran volunteers there." "Tried?" Thomas's eyebrow raised slightly. A small smile crossed Snake's face. "Let's just say they learned what happens when you threaten combat veterans. But that's not the real problem. This was just a test, seeing how we'd respond." Reynolds entered, his satellite phone still in hand. "Just got off with state police. Similar incidents in 3 other towns. They're coordinating. planning something bigger. Thomas moved to the wall map, now marked with pins showing veteran-protected communities across 3 states. They're looking for weak points, places where our response might be slower, our presence thinner. Outside, Razor and his father led a training session for new veteran volunteers, their voices carrying through the open window. "Remember, we're not just teaching protection," the older man instructed. "We're teaching community building, something worth defending." The afternoon brought more reports of cartel pressure, subtle threats to businesses in protected towns, attempts to bribe local officials, offers of alternative protection to vulnerable communities. But everywhere they pushed, they found veterans, standing firm. Different from gang intimidation, Sheriff Carter noted during the emergency council meeting. "These guys are professionals." "So are we," Thomas replied calmly. "And we've got something they don't understand, real brotherhood." The veterans' response began taking shape as Reynolds coordinated with chapters across the region. Combat-experienced riders moved between protected towns, strengthening weak points, establishing communication networks. The cartels might have money and fear on their side, but the veterans had decades of tactical experience and unshakable unity. "Got something else," Snake reported late in the day. "Those cartel observers, they're not just watching us. They're approaching former gang members in other towns, offering money to switch sides." Thomas's unseeing eyes narrowed. "Any takers?" "Not here." Snake's pride was evident. "We know what real strength looks like now, but some other towns, guys who haven't gone through what we did here in Whisper Valley." The implications were clear. The cartels were trying to subvert the veterans' program from within, using money and promises of power to tempt those still learning about real brotherhood. The tavern had become a strategic hub as veteran leaders gathered to coordinate response plans. The town's transformation was evident in how naturally civilians and veterans worked together, sharing information, supporting operations. "They think we're just some local security program," Reynolds told the assembled leaders. "Don't understand what they're really facing. We're not rent-a-cops or weekend warriors. We're combat veterans who never forgot our oath to protect." Razor's father, drawing on decades of veteran connections, had been reaching out to other military organizations. "Got special forces associations interested in our program. They're seeing what we're building here. Real community defense, real transformation." As night fell over Whisper Valley, Thomas stood at his usual spot on the tavern's porch, his acute hearing painting a precise picture of veteran patrols moving through the streets. The town had changed so much since that first confrontation with the Iron Wolves. Now it was about to face a bigger test. "Thinking about Echo?" Reynolds asked, joining him. "Thinking about how it's always the same," Thomas replied. "Different enemy, different terrain, same principle. They think fear and money are stronger than brotherhood." Snake entered with fresh intelligence. Cartel movements spotted near 3 veteran-protected towns, their patterns suggesting coordinated action coming soon. "They're using our size against us," Cooper observed. "Figure we can't protect everything at once." Thomas's smile carried decades of combat wisdom. "They're thinking like criminals. We need to think like soldiers." "Reynolds, remember that operation in 2010? The one where we made the enemy think we were weak?" The captain's eyes lit with understanding. "Let them think they've found our weakness, then show them what real strength looks like." The command center hummed with activity as veterans coordinated across 3 states. They weren't just protecting individual towns anymore. They were defending a movement, a transformation that threatened the cartel's entire power structure. "Got confirmation," Snake reported after midnight. "Major cartel push coming. They're calling in muscle from 3 states, planning to hit multiple towns simultaneously." "Good." Thomas's response surprised some of the younger veterans. "Let them come. Time they learned what they're really facing." The night deepened over Whisper Valley as preparations continued. Veterans who'd faced worse odds in harder places moved with quiet confidence through the mountain darkness. Former gang members who'd found redemption in service stood ready to defend their transformation. "Feels like old times," Reynolds observed, peering at tactical displays in the command center. "Us gathering in the dark, thinking they've got us. Figured out." Thomas listened to more veteran riders arrive, responding to Reynolds' call for reinforcement. His grandfather's violin rested in its case nearby, its presence a reminder of everything they stood for. "Old times," he agreed, his enhanced hearing tracking movement patterns across the valley. "But better odds. Back then, we were just soldiers, facing an enemy. Now we're brothers, protecting something bigger than ourselves." The war for Whisper Valley had ended months ago, but a larger battle was beginning. Not just for one town's soul, but for the future of communities across 3 states. The cartels were about to learn what Marcus Stone had discovered the hard way. Real strength isn't found in fear or money, but in the unshakable bonds of men who'd faced real battles and never forgotten their true purpose. The cartel's first move came at dawn, exactly as Thomas had predicted. Multiple SUVs with tinted windows entered veteran-protected towns across 3 states, their occupants carrying the professional demeanor of experienced soldiers for hire. But Whisper Valley was ready, and so were their allied communities. "Cedar Creek reports 6 vehicles," Cooper announced in the command center. "Millbrook has 8, Riverside showing 10. Thomas studied the tactical display through Cooper's eyes, his mind calculating moves and counter-moves. "They're committing significant forces. Good. Means they're taking us seriously." Reynolds coordinated responses from his position at the communications hub, veteran riders moving between towns, with military precision. "All units maintain observation only. Let them think they're in control." Snake entered with fresh intelligence, his former gang connections proving invaluable. "Cartel hired professional mercenaries, ex-military, but not the honorable kind. Men who'll do anything for money." "Perfect," Thomas's smile carried the confidence of a man who'd faced worse odds. "Professionals are predictable, and these men are about to learn the difference between fighting for pay and fighting for brotherhood." In Cedar Creek, cartel forces moved to isolate veteran positions, not realizing they were being channeled into predetermined zones. Razor's father commanded the local defense, using tactics learned in decades of combat. "They're following the pattern," he reported via secure channel, "taking exactly the bait we left for them." Similar reports came in from other towns as the cartel operation unfolded. Their forces moved with professional skill, but they were fighting the wrong battle, trying to intimidate men who'd faced real war. "Millbrook reports first contact," Cooper announced. "Cartel tried to pressure local businesses, found veterans. Waiting, no shots fired, but message delivered." The tavern had transformed into a secondary command post, townspeople providing support as veteran riders moved in and out. The smell of coffee mixed with the tension of coordinated resistance. "Remember Vietnam?" Reynolds asked Thomas during a brief, quiet moment. "How the enemy thought they had us surrounded at Echo until they realized we wanted them to think that." Thomas nodded. "Same principle here. Let them think they're in control until—" "Whisper Valley, this is Riverside," the radio crackled, with urgency. "Cartels making their play, trying to take our command center. Right on schedule." Thomas moved to the tactical map. "All units execute Phase 2. The veterans' response unfolded with practiced precision. In each targeted town, cartel forces suddenly found themselves facing not just local defenders but coordinated resistance from multiple directions. "They're targeting our command centers," Snake observed, "trying to decapitate our leadership." "Because they think we're organized like them," Thomas replied. hierarchical, dependent on central control. Time to show them what real brotherhood looks like. The morning sun climbed higher as the cartel operation began to falter. Their professional soldiers, expecting to face disorganized local resistance, instead encountered combat veterans moving with tactical precision. "Got word from State Line," Razor reported, rushing in. "Cartels calling in reinforcements. They're not used to this kind of resistance." "Good," Reynolds' smile was grim. "Means they're committed, can't back out without losing face." In Cedar Creek, cartel forces attempted to intimidate local businesses, only to find veterans and reformed gang members standing together. The sight of former enemies united in defense of community shook their confidence. "They don't understand," Snake told his team as they secured their sector. "Think this is about territory or power. It's about something bigger, something they can't buy or frighten away." Thomas listened through his enhanced hearing as more veteran riders arrived, responding to Reynolds' call for support. The sound of their disciplined approach echoed off the mountain walls, a reminder that some bonds can't be broken by money or threats. "Cartels making mistakes," Cooper reported, "getting frustrated. Their professionals aren't used to being outmaneuvered." "Because they're fighting for money," Thomas replied. "We're fighting for something else, something they don't understand." Reports continued flowing in as the morning progressed. In each town, cartel forces found themselves facing not just local resistance, but a coordinated network of combat veterans who'd never forgotten their training. "Riverside secure," the radio crackled. "Cartel forces withdrawing. They tried to bribe some of our reformed gang members, got quite an education about real loyalty." Reynolds coordinated the next phase, veteran riders moving between towns to reinforce potential weak points. The cartel's attempt to divide and conquer was meeting an unshakable wall of brotherhood. "They're pulling back," Snake announced late in the morning. "Regrouping. Our sources say they're calling their bosses for new orders." "Not retreating, though," Razor added, watching through binoculars. "Saw their reinforcements arriving. High-end vehicles, professional operators. They're escalating." Thomas studied the tactical display through Cooper's detailed descriptions, seeing the larger pattern emerging. "They're used to enemies they can buy or frighten. We're showing them something different, something that threatens their whole power structure." In the tavern, townspeople watched veteran riders move with military precision through the streets. The fear that had once gripped their community was gone, replaced by the confidence of people who knew they weren't standing alone. Getting reports from other towns, Cooper updated the situation map. Cartels changing tactics, moving in heavier weapons, more professional operators. They're done testing. Next phase will be serious. "Good!" Thomas's response carried the weight of combat. "Experience. Let them commit everything. Let them think they've got us figured out. Then we show them what real veterans can do." The morning's engagement had been just the beginning. The cartel's professional soldiers were regrouping, planning their next move. But they were fighting men who'd learned their trade in the world's harshest battlefields. "They'll hit us harder next time," Reynolds observed, as they watched cartel forces withdraw to regroup. "Bring everything they've got." "Let them," Thomas replied, his calm confidence spreading to younger veterans around him. Time they learned. What Marcus Stone learned. You can't defeat brotherhood with bullets, can't buy victory over men fighting for something bigger than themselves. The violin that had started everything still rested in its case nearby, its meaning now extending far beyond one man's legacy. The war that had begun with one act of disrespect had grown into something larger, a battle for the soul of communities across 3 states. As the sun reached its peak, veteran riders continued arriving, drawn by the call of brotherhood and the chance to stand once more against chaos. The cartel was about to learn what Marcus had discovered, that real power isn't found in violence or money, but in the unshakable bonds of men who'd never forgotten what it meant to be warriors. Thomas's enhanced hearing picked up the cartel's next move before anyone else. "Multiple vehicles approaching from 3 directions," he announced. "Professional deployment pattern. They're making their major push." The veterans' response was immediate and coordinated. Years of combat experience multiplied across hundreds of coordinated defenders created an overwhelming tactical presence. "They're targeting civilian areas," Snake reported urgently, "trying to draw our forces out of position." "Not this time," Razor responded, leading his team of reformed gang members. They moved with newfound discipline, evacuating civilians while maintaining tactical integrity. The cartel's attempt to create chaos met organized resistance at every point. Inside the tavern, now serving as a medical support center, townspeople watched their defenders move with military precision. The fear that had once paralyzed communities was replaced by determined resolve. Multiple breach attempts in Millbrook. Cooper updated the tactical display. "Cartels throwing everything they've got at us." "Let them," Reynolds' confidence was absolute. "Every move they make just proves what we've been saying. This isn't random crime anymore. This is organized warfare against American communities." Thomas listened through his acute hearing as veteran riders moved between defensive positions, their coordination flawless. The cartel's professional operators found their carefully planned operations falling apart. Their tactical advantages evaporating against veterans implementing sophisticated battlefield strategies. "They're adapting," Snake warned, monitoring intercepted communications, bringing in their reserve units, everything they've got. "Good," Reynolds' voice carried decades of tactical wisdom. "Let them commit fully. Let them show everyone exactly who they are and what they're willing to do." Lightning's team intercepted a cartel squad attempting to flank veteran positions. The reformed gang members moved with disciplined precision, their actions proving their transformation from criminals to protectors. Through his enhanced hearing, Thomas tracked every movement, every tactical shift. His mind calculated angles and responses just as he had in Afghanistan. "Remember," his voice carried across the radio network, "we're not just winning a battle, we're showing everyone what real community defense looks like." The first rays of afternoon sun painted the sky as state police began moving into position. Cartel forces, their professional reputation shattered, found themselves facing not just tactical defeat, but complete exposure of their operations. "Federal task force beginning arrests in Riverside," Cooper reported, getting similar reports from all sectors. "This is it. The cartel's entire regional network is coming down." 3 months after the cartel's defeat, Whisper Valley faced an unexpected challenge. Their success had drawn attention not just from communities seeking help, but from powerful interests who preferred the old way of doing things. Thomas McKenna stood at his usual position on the tavern's porch, his enhanced hearing detecting unfamiliar vehicles conducting surveillance of veteran positions. "Corporate security firms," Reynolds explained during their morning briefing at the Outpost. "Private military contractors. Our success is threatening their business model. They've been lobbying against the national expansion of our program." Snake entered with fresh intelligence, his expression concerned. "They're approaching town councils in our protected communities, offering professional security services at deep discounts, trying to undermine our veteran network." "Of course they are," Thomas replied, his voice steady. "We're showing people they don't need mercenaries, that real community protection comes from within." The morning brought news of the first direct challenge. A private security corporation had established operations in Cedar Creek, attempting to replace the veteran presence with their own contractors. "They're well-funded," Cooper reported, updating the tactical display. Ex-military operators, corporate backing, political connections, different kind of fight than we're used to. Razor monitored communications from his position in Cedar Creek. They're professional, but something's off. These contractors don't move like our veterans, don't connect with the community the same way. Thomas studied the situation with the same tactical understanding that had served him in Afghanistan. They're making the same mistake the cartel made, thinking this is about firepower and tactical superiority when it's really about something else entirely. About community, Reynolds finished, about transformation, about real brotherhood. The corporate challenge spread to other protected towns. Private security teams established visible presence, their modern vehicles and equipment contrasting with the veterans' more modest resources. They're trying to make us look obsolete, Snake observed, watching a corporate security patrol pass the tavern, like we're just old soldiers who don't understand modern threats. Sarah served coffee to veteran leaders, gathering to address the new challenge. These corporate types came into the tavern sometimes, all polish and procedure, no heart. Michael arrived with reports from other communities. They're offering towns complete security packages, professional operators, latest equipment, corporate liability coverage. Making our veteran program look amateur in comparison. Thomas's response carried the weight of combat experience. Show them the difference. Show them what real community protection looks like. The veterans' response began taking shape in each challenged community. They demonstrated the depth of their connection to the people they protected. Where corporate teams conducted patrols, veterans engaged with residents. Where private security offered procedures, veterans offered understanding. Getting interesting reports, Cooper announced mid-afternoon. Corporate teams running into problems they didn't expect. Their tactical procedures aren't working here. Snake led his team in demonstrating the difference. When corporate security responded to a local dispute with textbook procedure, his reformed gang members showed the power of community understanding and personal connection. They don't get it, Razor reported from Cedar Creek. Their operators are trained for threats, not transformation. They can't understand why people trust us more. Thomas listened to a corporate security team attempt to handle a situation involving former gang members. Their professional approach fell apart when faced with Snake's team showing real understanding, real redemption. That's their weakness, Reynolds observed. They can only protect. They can't transform, can't show people a better way. The afternoon brought town council meetings across 3 states. Corporate security presented their professional credentials, their modern methods, their tactical superiority. Then, veteran leaders stood up. Let me tell you about transformation, Snake addressed. The Whisper Valley Council. About men who showed us that real strength isn't about equipment or procedures. It's about standing together, about believing in something bigger than yourself. Razor and his father presented in Cedar Creek, their story of redemption and reunion, striking deeper than any corporate presentation. Other reformed gang members spoke in different towns, each testimony showing the depth of change the veterans had brought. Getting reports from everywhere, Cooper updated the situation board. Communities choosing our program over corporate security. They're seeing the difference between protection and transformation. Thomas led evening briefing as veteran leaders gathered to assess the challenge. The violin that had started everything rested nearby, its meaning now deeper than ever. These corporate types thought they could replace us with procedures and equipment, Reynolds summarized. They never understood what we really built here. The night deepened as Whisper Valley's veterans maintained their watch. Corporate security teams continued their patrols in some towns, their presence highlighting the contrast between professional protection and true community guardianship. You know what they'll never understand? Thomas asked Reynolds as they watched corporate vehicles pass. You can't buy what we've built, can't replace brotherhood with procedures, can't substitute equipment for trust. In Mary Ellen's Tavern, photos covered one wall documenting not just Whisper Valley's transformation, but the movement it had inspired. The corporate security firms had withdrawn their challenge months ago, their professional procedures no match for the deep community bonds the veterans had forged. Their departure marked the final victory, proof that real protection couldn't be bought, only earned through trust and transformation. "Final numbers are in," Reynolds reported, joining Thomas at his usual spot on the porch. 1,000 communities protected, 10,000 veterans involved, over 50,000 former gang members choosing a better path. And it all started with one phone call. Snake approached, his bearing now carrying the quiet authority of a man who'd found his true purpose. He led the national training program for reformed gang members, showing others the path from chaos to redemption. "Got something to show you," he told Thomas, leading him to the newly established Veterans Memorial Hall, once the Iron Wolves compound, now a testament to transformation. The walls told Whisper Valley's story, but more importantly, showed its ripple effects across the nation. "Your grandfather would be proud," Thomas told him, sensing the display of Snake's family military history alongside his own journey from gang enforcer to community leader. "You found your way back to real service." Razor and his father coordinated the day's events, their relationship now a powerful symbol of healing and reunion. Other father-son pairs from across the country had followed their example, mending bonds broken by gang life. "Sometimes I think about Marcus," Razor remarked, watching more visitors arrive. "How his attempt to break this town's spirit ended up transforming communities nationwide. The afternoon brought together everyone who'd played a part in Whisper Valley's story. Sarah and Michael had transformed the tavern into a museum of sorts, documenting not just their town's journey, but the movement it had inspired. "Remember when we used to fear the sound of motorcycles?" Sarah asked the gathered crowd. "Now that sound means hope is arriving, means transformation is possible." Sheriff Carter presented Thomas with the official charter, establishing Whisper Valley as the permanent headquarters for the National Veterans Community Protection Program. The document bore signatures from federal agencies, state governments, and military organizations nationwide. "But that's not what matters most," Thomas told the assembled leaders. "What matters is what we've proven. That real strength isn't about force or fear. It's about standing together, about offering everyone a chance at redemption." Snake and his team demonstrated their training methods, showing how former gang members could become community protectors. The precision of their movements, the depth of their transformation left powerful impressions on observers from around the country. "This is what real change looks like," he explained. "Not just stopping the cycle of violence, but replacing it with something better, something built on brotherhood and true purpose." As evening approached, Reynolds gathered the core team for a private moment before the final ceremony. The violin that had started everything rested nearby, its meaning now extending far beyond Whisper Valley's boundaries. "Got word from Washington," he told them. "Programs being adopted by military bases nationwide. They're using our veteran community partnership as a model for helping soldiers transition back to civilian life." Thomas listened to the mountain wind, his enhanced hearing painting a picture of a valley transformed. He remembered that first confrontation with the Iron Wolves, how one act of disrespect had sparked something none of them could have imagined. "Sometimes the biggest changes come from the smallest moments," he observed, one phone call leading to total transformation. The night's ceremony began with a parade of motorcycles, veterans and reformed gang members riding together, their combined presence a powerful symbol of redemption. Communities across the country watched via live stream as Thomas addressed the gathering. 1 year ago, when they mocked that violin, they thought they were showing strength he began. Instead, they sparked something they couldn't understand, something money can't buy, fear can't break, and time can't erode: the power of men standing together for something bigger than themselves. Snake and Razor led the next generation of leaders in the Veterans Pledge, a commitment to community, to transformation, to showing others the better path. Their voices, once raised in gang violence, now carried the authority of men who'd found their true calling. "The real victory isn't in what we've stopped," Reynolds told the assembled crowd. "It's in what we've started, a movement that proves it's never too late for redemption, never too late to choose a better way." Thomas's fingers traced the worn surface of his grandfather's violin case, feeling the history embedded in its leather. The instrument had survived Gettysburg, bringing comfort to dying soldiers. Now it had sparked a different kind of healing, a transformation that spread across the nation. His enhanced hearing picked up the sound of more motorcycles. Approaching, not threats now, but promises of help, of hope, of brotherhood. 1 year after the confrontation that changed Whisper Valley forever, the small mountain town prepared to commemorate its transformation from local victory to national movement. The morning sun cast long shadows as Thomas McKenna performed his evening ritual at the tavern, his violin singing to a packed house. But this time he wasn't alone. Hundreds of veterans, reformed gang members, and community leaders from across the country stood in respectful silence as the music spoke of redemption and renewal. The corporate security firms had withdrawn their challenge months ago, their professional procedures proving no match for the deep community bonds the veterans had forged. Their departure marked more than just another victory. It proved that real protection couldn't be bought, only earned through trust and transformation. "Final assessment complete," Reynolds announced, joining Thomas after the performance. 1,000 protected communities, 15,000 veterans involved, nearly 60,000 former gang members choosing a better path. Snake, who now led the national training program for reformed gang members, approached the stage. His bearing carried the quiet authority of a man who'd found his true purpose. "Sir, we've got representatives here from 30 states. They all want to learn what you taught us, the difference between intimidation and real strength." Thomas ran his fingers along his grandfather's violin, the instrument that had survived Gettysburg and now symbolized a different kind of healing. "Remember what I told you the first time you asked about transformation?" Snake nodded, his voice carrying to the hushed crowd. "You said real strength isn't about making people fear you, it's about giving them something to believe in." The Veterans Memorial Hall, once the Iron Wolves compound, now served as a national training center. Its walls told not just Whisper Valley's story, but documented similar transformations across the country. Photos showed former gang members standing alongside veterans, communities rediscovering their soul, and the unbreakable bonds forged between protectors and protected. "Sometimes I think about Marcus," Razor told the gathering during his keynote speech. "How his attempt to destroy one man's legacy ended up creating something indestructible. He thought breaking a violin would break our spirit. Instead, it helped us find our true strength." His father stood beside him, their reconciliation a powerful symbol of the healing that had spread far beyond Whisper Valley's boundaries. The afternoon ceremony brought together the core team that had started it all. Sarah had transformed the tavern into more than just a gathering place. It was now a symbol of community renewal, where veterans and townspeople shared meals and stories, where former enemies learned to become brothers. "Remember how this place used to feel?" she asked Michael as they watched the crowds mingle. "All that fear, all that tension. Now listen to it, nothing but hope and brotherhood." Sheriff Carter presented the official charter establishing Whisper Valley as the permanent headquarters for the National Veterans Community Protection Program. The document bore signatures from federal agencies, state governments, and military. organizations nationwide. But as Thomas told the assembled leaders, the real victory isn't in official recognition. It's in what we've proven, that real strength isn't about force or fear. It's about standing together, about offering everyone a chance at redemption. As evening approached, Reynolds gathered the original team for a private moment. Thomas's violin rested in its case nearby, its meaning now extending far beyond one man's legacy. "Got word from Washington," Reynolds said quietly. "They're implementing our program at military bases nationwide, using our veteran community partnership as a model for helping soldiers transition back to civilian life." Thomas listened to the mountain wind, his enhanced hearing painting a picture of a valley transformed. He remembered that first confrontation with the Iron Wolves, how one act of disrespect had sparked something none of them could have imagined. "Sometimes the biggest changes come from the smallest moments," he observed. One phone call leading to total transformation. The night ceremony concluded with a candlelight vigil. Veterans and reformed gang members stood together, their combined presence a powerful symbol of redemption. Communities across the country joined via live stream as Thomas addressed the gathering. "1 year ago, when they mocked this violin, they thought they were showing strength," he began. "Instead, they sparked something they couldn't understand, something money can't buy, fear can't break, and time can't erode, the power of men standing together for something bigger than themselves." The violin's music filled the mountain. Air won last time that night, but now its song carried far beyond Whisper Valley. Each note spoke of redemption, of the possibility of change, of the strength found in unity. The sound echoed off the mountain walls, carrying a message to communities across the nation. That real power isn't found in violence or fear, but in the unbreakable bonds of men who stand together for something greater than themselves. As darkness settled over Whisper Valley, Thomas stood on the tavern's porch, his enhanced hearing taking in the sounds of celebration. The fear that had once permeated these streets was gone, replaced by something stronger. Hope, purpose, brotherhood. The war that had begun with one act of disrespect had evolved into something profound, a movement proving that real change is possible, that redemption is available to anyone brave enough to choose it. The violin still sang in Whisper Valley, but its meaning had grown. It no longer just represented one man's legacy or one town's defiance. It stood for the power of transformation, for the possibility of redemption, for the truth that real strength isn't found in breaking things, but in rebuilding them, in showing others a better way, in standing together against the darkness, not with fear or force, but with the unshakable power of brotherhood and belief in something bigger than ourselves. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories, right? On your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.